Hello, everyone. Just a few thoughts on our second reading from Frantz Fanon. This is the conclusion to The Wretched of the Earth. Very short reading. I decided why not have a short reading? Maybe that would be good after a series of long readings to have something more manageable that we could look at as a whole rather than trying to piece together something very long, which is what we've been doing. Interesting conclusion. It seems to me that this is looking forward. Fanon died very soon after writing this, I believe, so we didn't really get to experience the period, the 60s, 70s, to today of decolonization and the fate of these newly liberated parts of the world. But it seems that in this conclusion, he's looking forward and giving advice about the future, about the post-colonial future. And it seems to me that he's got one overall very emphatic message, and that is do not try to emulate, imitate, or catch up with Europe, whatever that means. Um, do not try to build a new nation or a new community on the European model, and do not try to catch up with Europe. And I suppose that means economically, technologically, or politically in any way. Do not use Europe as your goal or model for building a new society. I don't think that could be stated in terms that are any more clear. And it's quite interesting, you know. And by Europe, he means Europe, but by Europe, he also means America in a certain way, right? Because he has some interesting things to say about America here. This is at the bottom of page 236. 2 centuries ago, a former European colony took it into its head to catch up with Europe. It has been so successful that the United States of America has become a monster where the flaws, sickness, and inhumanity of Europe have reached frightening proportions. Well, wow. So if there's anything worse than Europe in Fanon's mind, it's America, where we apparently, in the 18th century, where we took it into our heads to catch up with Europe, we succeeded to such an extent that we became even worse than Europe. I think is clearly what he's saying. So, yeah, I mean, extremely interesting, right? Um, and that does seem to be the message that the future cannot be, or shouldn't be, a European type future for the former colonists. It's got to be something else. And that's the question. What else should it be? Um, he says here, this is at the bottom of page 238, the third world. And by the third world, we mean the former, much of the third world is the formerly colonized world. Um, the third world must start over a new history of man. And that seems to be the message that the the alternative to mimicking or trying to catch up with the European model is to do something truly new and creative and create a new type of human being. Um, see, he says that more than once. Yes, it's the last thing he says. For Europe, for ourselves, and for humanity, comrades, we must make a new start, develop a new way of thinking, and endeavor to create a new man. That is, a new form of human being, something totally new that would be different from the European model, different from the colonial model, something entirely new. What would that be? That's difficult to say. And I don't fault him for perhaps being very abstract here, because when we start talking about a new form of humanity, a new form of society, a new way of thinking, I mean, it's hard to we reach perhaps the limits of our imagination. If it's going to be totally new, how could we even describe it? But he does give us, again, we go back a page to page 238, some notion of what he means, I think. Um, he says, but what matters now is not a question of profitability, not a question of increased productivity, not a question of production rates. No. It is not a question of back to nature. It is the very basic question of not dragging man in directions which mutilate him. And that may be the best that you can say, is that the forms of society that we have been living with in the modern period, the age of European Western dominance, have been ways of living, social ways of living, which have mutilated us. I think that might be meant in the physical sense, but I think mostly in the social and psychological sense. That is, it's not so much advice about how to shape this new society or this new vision of humanity, but perhaps what not to do, not to mutilate it, not to have forms of economic and political society that destroy human beings, but rather to find ways that build them up.